Hi, my name is Rebecca Myers. I focused my final paper on the education for Alaska Native students, the past and present. I chose to focus on this because as a person new to Alaska, I'm adjusting to the differences in culture. In addition to that, I am a teacher here in Anchorage, and I have had some students come in from rural villages, and I'm trying to find some perspective on where they fit in with my teaching style and what I can do to better serve them. In starting my research, I went back and looked at just education in general. Education is a process by which we share important skills, knowledge, and traditions. They are generally shared from one generation to another. It is not a process that is merely completed in schools. Unfortunately, the westernized view of education portrays it as something that we do in a desk with a teacher at the front of the room doing homework and taking tests. It is very much a varied approach from one culture to another and even one person to another. Before westernization, the Native education process was the sharing of knowledge through experiences and storytelling. It is very frequent in the readings that I did trying to pull together ideas. I found examples where someone recalled a memory of learning from an elder a skill or a cultural norm that they needed to use throughout their life. One instance was an article where a boy and his brother learned how to hunt caribou from their father, and they merely observed what he did, and they saw his practices and how they could implement them to be successful in their hunting. It's very clear that the knowledge they needed was in front of them and not something they had to guess about. It was centered around what they needed to know to survive and continue as a community within their cultures. It was not about a list of standards that someone from far away had put out and stated they needed to know. And it was certainly a set of learnings that evolved as needed, as cultures changed, as the ecosystems around them changed. The learning that they gathered also changed. After westernization, education became the best mechanism for achieving assimilation. Missionaries took over schooling and worked toward taking away native language and culture through, unfortunately, practices that were very traumatic for the students and their parents. This was described as the civilization savagism paradigm by Timothy Jester. He described it as an idea that was directed at eliminating native identities and replacing it with what were considered appropriate, more civilized behaviors. In addition to this, boarding schools became the norm to further create separation between families to make the elimination of culture and language somewhat easier. It also put students in a more central location, keeping them from their families. After Alaska gained statehood, there was research done at the federal level that led to establish secondary schools in villages rather than have students have to leave their village to gain education. These schools were and are governed by non-native standards and legislation. They are not determined by the communities in which they are existing. As a result of that, continually, large achievement gaps are identified by the assessments used to grade these schools. In my view, I see that it's not necessarily that the students are failing to perform, but it's that we have a system set up that fails the students as it doesn't recognize their needs, communities, or cultures. Public schools, governed by the federal government, are centered around a Western worldview that directly conflicts with the Native approach to the world and especially education. Native language and culture is certainly a means to promote change within education. The Navajo Dropout Study that was completed in the 1980s found that the most successful students were, for the most part, fluent Navajo English bilinguals. As a result, there have been many attempts to encourage native language learning For instance, ensuring that there's a teacher that speaks a native language if there are 8 students that speak the same language within a school. Unfortunately, we're still approaching education in direct conflict with the worldview that Native cultures have. Native cultures see the world as cyclical and interrelated. Everything fits together, all of the pieces. Western worldviews are compartmentalized and decontextualized and break everything apart because we want to know why every little piece works instead of seeing it as a part of a whole as the Native cultures do. Mathematics and the disciplines of the science have their own languages and areas of expertise. Each are isolated from the other so that there is no understanding of interrelationships and interconnectedness of all phenomena of this universe. This quote struck me because I'm a math teacher and I spent 6 years studying math as an undergrad and a graduate student. And as I sat back and looked at my educational experience, it is very true that in the Western view, my knowledge up to my later undergrad graduate study was very compartmentalized. I learned bits and pieces within specific courses, but I didn't see how all of those things fit together and why they were important and how they could be used in things outside of math. Once I got to my graduate studies and I was having to take my statistical knowledge and apply it within biology or in business, I saw a great deal more of why it was important and how it could be used. Native knowledge, especially with regards to the sciences, are very largely discounted in Western circles because of the way that the information is collected. They collect knowledge through observation and study, being out in the ecosystems and observing the way that animals interact with one another, how plants are changing as things go on, how the stars in the sky change. They have all of this information, but it wasn't collected according to the preset way that we've adopted in Western circles, where we have a hypothesis and then we go study it and then we look at our data and see if it proves there's some kind of connection. As a result, they have very accurate information, great deal of it, but it's completely discounted and considered unimportant, unfortunately. And as a result of that, we have students that feel that their home knowledge is not worthy of what they're supposed to be learning in school. The assessment of learning within Native communities is focused and centered around survival and extinction. If you're learning how to hunt and you're not bringing anything home, your assessment of your ability to hunt is very clear. In contrast to that, Westernized learning is assessed by tests. The tests have nothing to do, in I would say 99% of instances, nothing to do with what you would actually practice outside of a testing scenario. That disconnect is extremely unfortunate because we use those standardized tests as the bar by which we grade Native schools and students. That in turn can perpetuates the idea that they're not performing to the level that they should. There's also evidence to suggest that Native students would perform better with Native teachers. I would think that most people could not argue with the common sense of that. We as people identify better with people that share our worldview, and in turn that makes us more able to trust and believe in what they're teaching us. Most teachers in the rural areas are outsiders that come under the promise of a good paycheck and an adventure out in the rural parts of Alaska, and they have little or no understanding of the culture in which they have been chosen to teach. Currently, there are more efforts being made to incorporate the Native language and culture as well as their worldviews into education. There's still some legislation, especially at the state and federal level, that conflicts with this, as they haven't really gotten on the same page with the Native communities. It would seem that we need to develop curriculum that incorporates the Native worldview and in some way find a way to assess that if necessary, in a way that also fits with their approach to learning and practice. There's certainly more work ahead with regards to Native education. It would seem apparent that we need to do work in developing curriculum and assessments that are more appropriate for Native students. Obviously, that would take a great deal of time and financial investment from the perspective of funding such an endeavor. I think we also need to look at adjusting our standards for these communities. Despite the fact that they do exist as part of a Western culture to some extent, these communities are not looking at the same worldview or the same practices that a student in California or Florida is looking at. Their approach to survival and existence is completely different, and to me, it seems that we are failing to prepare them appropriately for what they need to do. If we leave that preparedness to their families, then essentially we're forcing them to attend school for something that's not going to benefit them. But I can see that it's also a very difficult balance, because what about the students that want to go on to a university that's outside of their communities? How do we find a good way to make sure that they're prepared for that, as well as being able to function within their homes? As a teacher, I am somewhat overwhelmed at the information that's out there about Alaska Native education and finding my place in that. Hopefully, I can continue to gain information through reading and taking a few more classes and seeing where my place is in all of that. But it seems obvious that we still have a lot of work to do. Thank you.